Thank you very much for taking your time to join us. We know people are busy with their work, but you dedicated your time to be with us. This is the event where we want to engage, sharing ideas, talking about the challenges that faces us as a country, and we are here to unsettle and come up with ways that will transform how we think, how we teach, and how we live. Our focus today is on the combative decolonial philosophy of FRANTZ FANON. Ms. Mogopi informed you about the relationship of Prof. Nelson Maldonado Torres with FRANTZ FANON, so he's the right person to share with it. And as we speak, as the global world, we are having challenges. Palestine, Israel, and Gaza, he is the best guy to give us his thoughts, his ideas. So we are saying combative decolonial philosophy of FRANTZ FANON. We are privileged to welcome Professor Nelson Maldonado Torres, an eminent scholar of decolonial thought, whose work continues to illuminate and radicalize contemporary discourses in philosophy, ethics, and the human sciences. His intellectual commitments, as well as his practical alliances with movements, institutions, and communities, embody the key spirit of Fanon's legacy. That theory is the weapon for liberation. The legacy of FRANTZ FANON continues to haunt and inspire our post-colonial presence. His writings, particularly on the psychopolitical effects of colonialism and the necessity of decolonial struggle, remind us that decolonialization is not a metaphor. It is an ongoing, often combative process of dismantling structures of oppression and imagining radically different futures. Professor Maldonado Torres has played a pivotal role in extending and deepening these discussions across continents. At the College of Human Sciences, we continue to challenge ourselves to imagine what a decolonized university might look like. Not a rhetoric, but in practice. I'm sure most of you here are asking yourself, how can we change our ethics committees to really do exactly what the community wants? How can we change the way we do things? How can we convince Prof. Kosi that there is no need for an attendance register? Everything must be decolonized. But colleagues, I need evidence. If you can convince me on the evidence, I will agree. So why are we here today? We want to disrupt the dominant knowledge systems. We want to center African epistemologies, and we want to forge solidarities with broad struggles for justice. Today's seminar is the critical space in which we move beyond disciplinary boundaries. We are here to embrace discomfort and foster collective learning. Let me also take this opportunity to thank all those who made today possible. Firstly, I just want to thank all of you for being here. And also I want to thank our team that came in with Prof. Maldonado Torres. We've got our two colleagues from Portugal. Am I right? If you may raise your hands. How? Raise? Behind raise. Puerto Rico. Why am I saying Portugal? Okay, Puerto Rico. And then the ISHS team. Colleagues, please raise your hands. Please, please, please. There is the ISHS team. Thank you very much, colleagues, for connecting us with Prof. And also I want to thank Ms. Mogopi. I know there's a person who do the vote of thanks. Ms. Mogopi agreed to support, together with Prof. Safla, to make this event successful. Our catering, our marketing team, and all those who supported Ms. Mogopi in ensuring that this day is a successful one. Heartfelt welcome to all of you. Let us look forward to learning, engaging, and advancing the decolonial work that continues to define and challenge us as people that are at Unisa and other institutions. I officially open this seminar and wish us all a fruitful and transformative engagement. As human scientists, we always save time. Colleagues, you've got the CV of Prof. Nelson Maldonado Torres, but I'll just go through it quickly. And also alert people that are in a house. He is a scholar, is linked to ISHS, but nothing is stopping you from stealing him. Okay. Professor Nelson Maldonado Torres is a professor of philosophy. So people from the School of Humanities, there is a professor of philosophy when you want your thesis to be marked or any engagement or when you want to bring scholar. He is working at the University of Connecticut, USA. He is a professor extraordinaris at the University of South Africa under the wing of ISHS. But that's not stop you from engaging him. Okay. He is also a senior associate of the Black House Collective Soweto in South Africa. Soweto, yeah, at home. He is also a co-chair of the FANON Foundation, an international organization that contributes to anti-racist and decolonization struggles across the world, and a long-standing affiliate of the Institute for the Social and Health Sciences at Unisa. He is a decolonial transdisciplinary guru. He is everything, colleagues. He's a specialist in decolonial thoughts. He has published extensively on decolonial ethics, political philosophy, the theory of religion, philosophical anthropology. Luckily, I saw a COD for anthropology and a philosophy of the human sciences. He has done extremely well. He has published books, articles, and what I can share with you, colleagues, is that he published a book and chapters such as Palestine, the war against decolonialization, and combative decoloniality in the SAGE Handbook of Decolonial Theory that is published this year. He also published in Combative Decoloniality and the Abolition of Humanities in the Routledge Companion to Post-Colonial and Decolonial Literature. With Ms. Zandi Khadebe, who is a lecturer in the Department of Political Sciences, they have co-authored Combative Decoloniality and the Black House Paradigm of Knowledge, Creation, and Action. Can you see that, colleagues? We've got a guru here in the house. May we give him a round of applause as he comes to deliver his keynote lecture. Over to you, Prof. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you so very much, Dean Nkosi, for the kind introduction and for the invitation to the campus. Really a pleasure to come and be here in front of you and in front of you, my colleagues. Thank you all for coming. Also thanks for the Institute of Social Sciences for the long-standing relationship, also thanks to which I've been able to be here in various times, including now. Again, I'm going to talk about the combative decolonial philosophy of Frantz Fanon, and I want to start by sharing an anecdote with you. And it's about a conversation, lively conversation, that I once had with a very influential Afro-Caribbean theorist and thinker and novelist. Her name is Sylvia Wynter. Okay? And I was talking with her over, a very lively conversation, and I remember we were both talking about Afro-Caribbean thinkers, particularly of figures like Aimé Césaire and Frantz Fanon. And I guess that, our excitement was such that at one moment she stopped the conversation and she told me, Nelson, you see, almost like these people were incredible. We should not be like jealous, like we should not be envious of what they produced, because they lived in a time, in a historical moment that allowed a number of revelations and raised a number of challenges and questions, and they stood up to the challenge, right? And when we look at Fanon, I would like to see him like that. It's not simply the person, Fanon, who had a particular, coefficients of intelligence. No, it's the time that he lived, the questions that were posed to his generations, and how he happened to respond and face those questions, right? And it was in that, through the trajectory of his life, we can see the elaboration of what I've been referring to as combative decoloniality, right? But I want to step back for a second because I've kept thinking about that conversation with Sylvia Wynter. And there are many parts of my work that are done in conversation with her, right? As building on her ideas, contributing to them, sometimes trying to open new channels. And I kept thinking about that and about our mutual admiration of Fanon. I've come to see that at the same time we have many convergences and similarities and affinities, but also some differences, right? And so I want to present this combative, the notion of decoloniality as a combative project, which I think is in dialogue, but also different from the emphasis that you find in Wynter's work, and particularly in Wynter's reading of Fanon. So I'm going to start reviewing some of Sylvia Wynter's view on Fanon, and I'm reconstructing in a way that I am empathetic with and with I agree, but also I'm going to then, on the basis of that, share where I think that we start to diverge, right? And then on the basis of the notion of decoloniality, this other notion of decoloniality and this other maybe reading of Fanon, then in his centennial, well, we're celebrating the 100 years now. So then tell you a little bit about the kind of work that I've been doing in the last 10 years or so that are inspired by this combative vision of Fanon, right? And that is expressed in some of these recent chapters that have been published, the collaboration with Ms. Radebe, and so on. So they will have then 3 parts, okay? So Sylvia Wynter conceives Fanon as the initiator of a Copernican-like epistemological break with the premises of the, quoting her, West's inherited philosophical/epistemic traditions. These traditions are mainly 2. The first one is grounded on the Cartesian perspective of the self as a thinking substance, also known as the Cartesian cogito. In this perspective, a subject who is fully aware of itself and has rational powers can determine with certainty that it exists because it thinks. Cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Note that what the subject can be certain of is that it exists as a thinking substance, meaning that the Cartesian cogito is a thinking substance really without a body, initially in its first emanation. This has led to a long tradition in Western philosophy invested in trying to address the mind-body split, the divide between mind and body, and the problem of knowledge. How is it possible for a thinking substance to know about a substance other than its own matter, plain matter? Now, the other philosophical epistemic tradition, other than the Cartesian one, is purely biocentric. It establishes that consciousness can be explained with reference to biological and neurological processes, which is the direct opposite of the Cartesian model. While the Cartesian conception separates the mind from the body, the biocentric perspective subordinates consciousness to the body. According to this view, human development and human behavior can be explained with reference to genomic principles, which are principles that govern the function and evolution of genes. Wynter tends to identify this biocentric conception with the work of Charles Darwin. So, on the one hand, we have a Cartesian, and on the other hand, a Darwinian conception of the human being, and as a consequence of the human sciences. one can easily suspect that the Cartesian and the Darwinian conceptions of the human being might be two sides of the same coin, and perhaps equally limited. One subordinates the body to the mind, and the other subordinates the mind to the body. To be sure, these apparently reductionistic accounts of the human being are connected to the Western commitment, with the Western commitment to the idea of the racial differentiation of the human being in various ways. Adopting a Cartesian point of view, the racist adopting, and we're not saying that this is necessarily, this is, I think, has been an appropriation of Cartesianism, right? Not that it is the only possible one, but adopting a Cartesian point of view, the racist believes that colonized and racialized subjects are too attached to their body's inclinations, which cloud their mind and make it impossible for them to engage in superior thinking, to obtain clear and distinct ideas, or the kind of thinking needed to govern themselves, and much less a society with white people in it. Now, colonized and racialized subjects do not fare much better under the Darwinian account, since the racist point of view now appears in the differentiation between the strong, beautiful, and competent bodies of white people versus the supposedly degenerated, underdeveloped, and ugly bodies of colonized and racialized peoples. In short, whites appear as both mentally and genetically superior, worthy of reproducing themselves as a species, while colonized and people of color appear to be, to use Winter's terms, deselected from natural selection, or deselected, not sure how to pronounce that. You should already start getting a sense of the challenge for thinkers like Fanon, who aim in the middle of the last century to criticize and overcome simultaneously the one-sidedness and the racism of conceptions of the human and of the human sciences in globalized Western modernity, anchored in either the Cartesian or the Darwinian conception. As someone trained in psychiatry, Fanon confronted the modern colonial account of the human and configuration of the human sciences in general, as well as the limits of modern colonial psychology and psychiatry more in particular. The science of psychology entered the scene in the European university in the 19th century, and much of it followed the biocentric model. Supposed abnormalities in human behavior could be explained in reference to natural processes of some kind. This meant that diagnosing the problems of apparently so-called abnormal subjects require identifying the specific biological processes and functions that were apparently not working well, according to the biocentric psychologists. Therefore, studying the evolutionary history of a group of people was critical to diagnose the abnormal behaviors that emerged in it. The phylogenetic perspective was challenged by Sigmund Freud, who posited that it was critical to know the life trajectory of those individual human beings who exhibit the supposed abnormal behaviors. To the phylogenetic perspective, he added what is known as the ontogenic point of view. Now, Fanon, black skin, white masks, enters this scenario as what Winter refers to, she sees as a counter-manifesto. As a counter-manifesto that challenges the premises and implication of this set of interrelated epistemological positions and accounts of the human being. The Fanonian counterposition could be summarized as follows. First, in contrast to the Cartesian tradition, Fanon posits that the subject is irreducibly embodied, and that the embodied subject capacity to think through language testifies to the existence of a process through which such language is obtained and its meaning generated. In short, there is no language without socialization into a symbolic universe and the social environment where this meaning is established. So, for Fanon, the subject is both embodied and social. In contrast then to the biocentric conception, Fanon posits that while the subject is embodied, the principles that regulate their behavior are not solely genomically coded by their genes. The subject's actions bear the mark of a sociogenic principle. That's a term that Winter uses based on Fanon's introduction of sociogeny in Black Skin, White Masks. So Fanon will bring up the sociogenic principle, that not only a genomic one. This means that whatever any given subject thinks of itself, of others, and of the world is largely made possible and conditioned by their social reality. Third, Fanon introduces a sociogenic perspective to the study of the psyche of the mind, in addition to the phylogenetic and the ontogenic ones. Beyond biocentric psychiatry as well as Freudian psychoanalysis, he proposed a sociogenic approach. For Winter, Fanon's sociogenic approach is no less than revolutionary and demands a new science. A science that fully appreciates the hybrid formation of the human subject, a subject that is both consciousness and body, a science that can aim to understand the ways in which the sociogenic principle works, that is, the ways in which we are socialized into what we are. One could think that Winter is referring to the science of sociology when she writes about this new science, but she isn't. Don't get any illusions. Sociologists in the room, at least for Winter's perspective. Sociology is one of the sciences that emerged in Europe to study what were conceived to be complex European societies after the European Enlightenment, as opposed to the science of anthropology, which was designed to focus on the study of so-called primitive societies that are not as developed and do not produce as complex societies, supposedly. In that sense, sociology and anthropology, just like psychology, were sciences that worked within the hegemonic modern colonial and Western rationality, which explained this entire business of introducing decolonization still in the 21st century. To understand Winter's call for a new science, we have to consider that for Winter, what appears to be the most crucial in the process of socialization is language, since the sociogenic principle is transmitted linguistically. It is therefore by studying language, including the origin stories of societies that establish what is possible or impossible within their own universe of meaning or worldview, that we can get to understand the specific modes of self-understanding that are dominant in different societies and cultures. Thus, she calls for, quote, a new science of the word, W-O-R-D, science of the word, which is a term and a project that MSSR, Afro-Caribbean thinker, announced in a short essay published in 1946 entitled Poetry and Knowledge. This science of the word, that is a César's term that Winter adopts, is a science of ourselves as hybrid beings that generate, transmit, and change the codes that regulate their self-understanding and their understanding of the world through the creative and meaning-making powers of language. So far, so good? Maybe I can get a sip of water. Winter believed that César's 1946 Poetry and Knowledge and Fanon's 1952 Black Skin, White Masks inaugurated what she refers to an autopoietic turn/overturn that calls for the establishment of a new science, one that can seek to identify, quote, the laws of human auto-institution, by focusing on the symbols that determine what represents life and death within any given linguistic system. Winter approaches Fanon's Black Skin, White Mask as a text that explores the effects of a system that has led globalized Western modernity to identify whiteness with life and blackness with death, to the point that even people who are conceived as black are sociogenically encoded to develop phobias towards blackness and to desire whiteness. We are talking of sociogenic processes that, paraphrasing a passage from MSSR's in this course on colonialism, and a passage that Fanon cites in Black Skin, White Mask, result in the skillful injection of fear, inferiority complexes, trepidation, servility, despair, and abasement. This is the selection, the quote from MSSR's discourse on colonialism, with which that starts Black Skin, White Mask. That's the epigraph to the entire book. Fanon's exploration of the sociogenic creation of the idea of the white-black binary and of the phenomenon of adopting white masks is simultaneously an explanation of how racism works, as well as an example of how to approach human beings as hybrid creatures. That is, as beings who are constituted by mind and body. The sociogenic principle accounts for the ways in which subjects make sense of their own embodiment and of their interaction with others. By focusing on black colonized subjects, Fanon describes the sociogenic principle at stake in the formation of a principle that is part of globalized Western modernity, which is why his reflections are not only relevant to sciences that study black people, but to all sciences. For Winter, the construction and globalization of Western modernity, quote, began with the landing of a Portuguese expedition on the shores of Senegal, West Africa, in the 1440s, after the Common Era, followed by the transatlantic landing of Columbus on an island of the Caribbean in 1492. And it was this, she writes, that laid the basis of our contemporary single world system, as well as the single history that we now live. This means that both Africa and the Americas, she connects 1440, arrival in Senegal, and then 1492, both linked to the emergence of this new system centered in this principle. This means that both Africa and the Americas are implicated in the story of the generation of the sociogenic principle specific to Western modernity. Something similar happens with the category of the indigenous, as it was crafted in relation to so-called Indians in the so-called New World, and the concept of the black in Western modernity. Indian and black, those categories, the Indian and the black, serve as foundational stones on which European subjects would develop the conception of themselves as a qualitatively different kind of being who is naturally superior to all others. And therefore, whiteness is founded on that, positing of that difference with the indigenous population and the black. And that cannot be explained without both the Americas and Africa. In short, a sociogenic approach to the question about the formation of the Western idea of man, of the human sciences, and of racism implicates Africa and the Americas, as well as the New World indigenous population, as well as Africa and the black Afro-diasporic population globally. By the way, this deep connection between Africa and the Americas may help to explain, which we often, I think we are very used to think, this is part of a consequence of colonization, that we're typically accustomed to think and to look at the word continentally. People divide in different areas. So different continents have completely different realities. But this deep connection between Africa and the Americas may help to explain to some of you why it is so crucial to create research teams and projects that combine African intellectuals, artists, and community organizers with intellectuals, artists, and community organizers from the Caribbean and the Americas. When we are doing this, we are responding to that original link that it was there. The system that emerged did not emerge with us as two separate realities. It emerged through that linkage. Here in South Africa, we have been cultivating these relationships between African scholars, intellectuals, organizers, artists, and the same from the Americas through Unisa's own Institutes of Health and Social Sciences, which understand the significance of these explorations. It is not by coincidence that the Institute of Health and Social Sciences is a leading site of the exploration of decoloniality in South African psychology today. The Institute, and not only South African psychology, I mean, the work of the Institute is also being influential in the Caribbean, in Australia, many other places. The Institute has appreciation for what Winter refers to as the new science of the word, but their community sociogenic approach allows them to explore other areas beyond the study of linguistic codes, and therefore perhaps beyond Winter's new science. The Institute's researchers are contributing to the understanding of decoloniality, which can include but definitely exceeds the creation of a new science of the word. And that's me entering that and offering you that interpretation of part of the work of the Institute, which we can gladly correct and rectify, since many of them are here in the house. But I think that's how I've been seeing the work, and why I think we connect and what we have been building is partly because of that, right? I am, of course, giving you a reading of the Institute, but also I am already putting on the table some differences that I would have with Winter's autopoetic turn / overturn. Okay? That doesn't mean that I would reject the importance of the new science, just that is not really everything, or maybe even the center of how we should look at decoloniality. Building in dialogue with Winter, but even more so from Fanon, I have been pursuing the following considerations in my work. And this is where I'm telling you now more about this other view, this other approach to Fanon, highlighting the combative element, instead of finding in it the foundation for a new science. First, that the sociogenic principle that is specific to the post-15th century epoch of modern Western and colonial expansion that started in Africa and the Americas, and that continued through the planet, be referred to as the coloniality principle. The coloniality principle is the, using Winter's terms, information encoding organization principle that establishes the criterion of being, non-being, that is, of what counts as real or possible and what not, of life and death, and I would add of good and evil, in the context of our own so-called modernity. I should add here that while the sociogenic principle establishes the criterion of being, non-being, this cannot be conceptualized in terms of the zones of being and non-being in Fanon's work. People often forget that Fanon writes that in the majority of cases, the black subject cannot descend into the zone of non-being, meaning that the zone of non-being is not synonymous with a social zone of poverty or deprivation. Fanon's main argument is that violence toward black people indicates that they are taken as an emanation of evil, which leads to my next point. And I could explain more about this notion of the, how this, or the other interpretation I offer about these notions of the zone of being and non-being. But coming back to this idea that for Fanon the black subject is seen, is an emanation of evil, is evil made concrete, is evil embodied. It allows one to comprehend this following idea, that the coloniality principle demands a permanent war of groups who perceive themselves as incarnating goodness against others that they consider to be evil. It is because colonizers and settlers consider themselves to represent goodness that they think that their acts of colonization should be understood as benevolent acts of spreading civilization. It is also because they see indigenous, black, and colonized and racialized subjects as evil, either absolute evil or evil in various degrees, that their actions take the form of an incessant activity of eradicating or containing such evil. Coloniality is permanent war of a supposed supreme good against a threatening but also erotically compelling evil. From here that the black body is feared, hated, and desired all at once. This is much worse than appearing as non-being. Third, that the permanent war motivated by the coloniality principle results in the proliferation of actions that are worse than death. Death is the end of life, but there are actions that are worse than death. Consider being kept alive but constantly humiliated and in pain. Torture and rape tend to take these forms in Western modernity. In that sense, torture and rape are not meant to be events that happen to the colonized. Torture and rape are structural conditions of their existence. Under a social world driven by the coloniality principle, bodies are not so much an open door of consciousness, that's the Fanonian approach to embodiment, an open door of consciousness through which we connect to others in generous and receptive ways, but instruments of war through which some seek to dominate other bodies that appear as eminently killable, rapeable, and torturable. And I actually think that you can apply this to what is going on in Gaza today. That what we see, and Fanon actually was infected, Fanon wrote that colonization, that torture is essential for colonization. And colonization is also a project of torture. And I think somehow that torture and this way of conceiving the conception of black bodies and colonized bodies rapeable too, it speaks to conditions that are worse than genocide. So I wonder what is happening in Gaza today. I think we have not found the term yet, but I think it's worse than genocide. And they are not the only ones that are experiencing it or that have experienced it. I just think that we're trying to make the case for something that is really far worse and has been far worse for a long time. Fourth, that by helping us to analyze, make visible, and criticize the coloniality principle, Fanon's Black Skin, White Mask engages in a decolonial turn. The decolonial turn is both an attitude that problematizes hegemonic Western modernity and its coloniality principle, as well as a project that involves the generation of collective combat against coloniality and the formation of a new sense of self and decolonial principles that sustain what Fanon referred to as the work of the you, that sustain or that lead to what Fanon referred to as the work of the you. So we have to, this is the challenge of decoloniality. We have to try to transition from a world where torture, rape are normatively instituted, particularly in relation to certain subjects, to one where touching the other, feeling the other, discover each other, citing Fanon, is what is normal and at the center. Can we make that transition? And part of what I want to suggest is we cannot do it without appreciating the need of combat. There's no science that will do that transformation by itself. Finally, fifth, that the decolonial term may include, but certainly is more than a new science of the word. A science of the word can contribute to the socio-diagnostic that Fanon considers crucial to motivate self-disalienation and the search for freedom from the coloniality principle. However, no science or socio-diagnostic can take the place of the body-to-body engagement of the colonized as they come together to combat coloniality and to create bonds and relations that are not dictated by the coloniality principle. In that sense, while I agree with Winter about the relevance of Fanon's call for sociogeny as it appears in Black Skin, White Mask, I would add that it is equally important to pay attention to Fanon's thematization of combat in the wretched of the earth. Fanon's phenomenology pays attention to the transformations of the colonized as they take place in the midst of combat. And actually it wasn't only wretched of the earth. Attention to the collective forms of engagement among the colonized as they organize to counter the institutionalization of the coloniality principle is suggested in Black Skin, White Mask. It's there in the horizon, it's not the focus. But then only develop in other writings, such as Toward the African Revolution, A Dying Colonialism, and The Wretched of the Earth. Consider that Black Skin, White Mask explores mainly two modalities of the responses of the colonized to the coloniality principle. The first one appears in the first 3 chapters of the book, where Fanon studies the alienation of black subjects who desperately aim to wear white masks and escape blackness. The second existential response to the coloniality principle is that of someone who becomes aware of anti-black racism and who seeks to fight it back in some way. I'm talking of chapter 5 in Black Skin, White Masks. I could go on and on explaining that stage, that other attitude. That's different. That's a different scenario than the first 3 chapters. Fanon makes it clear in that. And what I'm saying is that there is another scenario that is not explored in the book. It's announced, but it's not explored. But then you find him in the history of the books. Black Skin, White Mask announces this third different modality. Because remember that the subject who aims to fight in the 5th chapter of Black Skin, White Mask, remember how that effort ends? Is it a successful effort of this alienation? It ends with weeping, with crying. Right? And it's only in the conclusion where we see what then we might try to do, and it's far less than an individualistic project of fighting. It's more a collective project. Black Skin, White Mask announces a different modality, that of subjects. This goes to the heart of what I mean by combative decoloniality, right? That of the subject who claims the right not to claim superiority or inferiority, but the possibility of creating the world of you by affirming and acting on the desire to touch the other, feel the other, discover each other. More than calling for a new science, Fanon concludes Black Skin, White Mask by calling for a particular kind of interaction, a particular way of being in the world that challenges the coloniality principle directly by engaging in actions that do not make sense in the world of coloniality. What does not make sense in the world driven by the coloniality principle is for colonized subjects to become receptive to each other and enact relationships that defy the orders of the coloniality principle. Because all of us are meant to look for recognition from the whites. Fanon's major writings after Black Skin, White Mask give a better idea of this possibility that involves resignation from the hegemonic criteria of goodness and excellence, and a reorientation that involves participation in the communal and collective processes by virtue of which the colonized simultaneously seek to combat the coloniality principle and build a different world. Another name for this is decolonization or decoloniality. And in this particular expression, combative decoloniality. In The Wretched of the Earth, Fanon writes that, quote, he writes that decolonization, quote, it starts from the very first day with the basic claims of the colonized. In actual fact, proof of success lies in a social fabric that has been changed inside out. This change is extraordinarily important because it is desired, clamored for, and demanded. The need for this change exists in a raw, repressed, and reckless state in the lives and consciousness of colonized men and women. But the eventuality of such a change is also experienced as a terrifying future in the consciousness of another species of men and women, the colonists, or the colonizers. He also writes that, quote, decolonization never goes unnoticed, for it focuses on and fundamentally alters being, and transforms the spectator crushed to a non-essential state into a privileged actor. Decolonization, he adds, infuses a new rhythm. And I want to underline that. Decolonization, don't forget it, infuses a new rhythm, specific to a new generation of people with a new language and a new humanity. Decolonization is truly the creation of new people. But such a creation cannot be attributed to a supernatural power. The thing colonized becomes a human being through the very process of liberation. Decolonization, therefore, implies the urgent need to thoroughly challenge the colonial situation, ergo the combat. Fanon's reference to the urgent need to thoroughly challenge the colonial situation speaks to a form of combat whose value is not only oppositional, that is, The colonial combat is not only about opposing the coloniality principle, but it is also generative and formative. It is about the amplification of community relations and the creation of collectives that simultaneously challenge the colonial situation and create the conditions of possibility for the colonized to abandon their adherence to the coloniality principle and to create the world of you. For Fanon, the path to decoloniality is thus best represented not in the formation of a cadre of experts that aim to decode the sociogenic principle at the university, but in the forms of critical thinking that already exist in communities that defy colonialism. These are institutions that he mentions like the JEMA in North Africa and Palaver in West Africa, as well as in the formations of collectives and liberation fronts that bring people together to confront coloniality practically, intellectually, and artistically. This does not mean that a new science of the word or the scholarly work at the university does not have anything to offer to the struggle, but that the colonial knowledge creation cannot dispense from participation in community formations and collectives that emerge or are sustained to confront coloniality in all these dimensions, and not only epistemic, to promote trust and accountability among the colonized, and to generate new decolonial ideas, affects, and symbols that contribute to our own self-decolonization and liberation. In short, when it comes to the colonial knowledge creation, the university is not center, but at best, satellite. Now, how do you make the case for this to scholars who have gone a great part of their lives wanting to be in academia, and for whom decolonization becomes a research topic through which they can demonstrate expertise? I sometimes worry that so-called decolonial scholars want to decolonize everything but their expertise. This takes me to a project in which I worked when I started my career, actually at Duke University. And I worked with Walter Mignolo, and then another colleague we had, Michelle Ramos-Anzano, an Afro-Caribbean poet who works on medicine and healing. And it was a project that it was called, the title was longer, but it included decolonizing expertise. And it was about dismounting this, targeting that. But I left Duke University to the University of California, Berkeley, and that project kind of died. We did not follow it. I went through a circuitous route to the exercise of decolonizing expertise that had to do with actually having a direct connection with the legacy of the third world strike at the University of California, Berkeley. That is another story. But it was while at Berkeley that I started to work with activists and became an organizer myself. All of that is what prepared me to continue exploring forms of decolonizing expertise in the context of engaging in combative forms of decoloniality, different from the forms of decoloniality light that are typically found in universities. And I have to say that, I've been doing part of that work for some time here with colleagues and collaborators in South Africa. I happened to meet Professor Shanaz Sufla in one of the earliest decoloniality schools here in this university. And then I came back here and I spent the first 3 months of 2016, which was the moment of the height of the Fifth Must Fall moment. And I had the opportunity to meet student organizers, members of the Black Academic Caucus at UCT, and also Sandy Radebe here and others at Unisa. And in that context, both Sandy and Professor Oyeronke Oyewumi, at that time she was also here, and they were attending a seminar that I was offering here. The room was not far from here, actually. And then in that moment in 2016, it's almost 10 years now, right? Sandy Radebe invited Professor Oyewumi and myself to the BHK, to the Black House Collective. And there we had a fascinating conversation with students who had played an important role in the Rose Must Fall and Fist Must Fall protest. Once I visited the Black House Collective, in a way I could not ever leave. I kind of remained connected to the work of the collective. And it became a site for me to continue decolonizing my expertise and exploring trans and extradisciplinary forms of decolonial knowledge creation. Working together at the Black House Collective, we realized that we were weaving knowledge, education, and artistic creation in ways that promote healing and desalination. We were and remain convinced that the ways in which we have taken up the banner of the Rose Must Fall and This Must Fall movement is an alternative to the ways in which most universities and scholars in those universities have taken up decoloniality. We refer to our approach as the Black House paradigm of knowledge creation and action. When I returned to South Africa as distinguished visiting scholar invited by the Academy of Science of South Africa in 2019, I offered presentations on the Black House paradigm with the idea that it provided one model among others that South African universities could build on to avoid having decoloniality collapse into a purely academic affair or a form of decoloniality light. Now, this leads me to the third part of the presentation. I'll read a little bit faster also because this part I am reading some selections of the essay that I had the privilege to write with Ms. Radebe. And as it was mentioned, the chapter, it's a chapter of a book on African studies, the chapter is entitled Combative Decoloniality and the Black House Paradigm of Knowledge, Creation and Action. I would urge everyone to read it, and actually it's freely accessible online. So the publication is a peer-reviewed open access publication. And maybe you can read it alongside the reflection I wrote last year or a year and a half ago about the 10 years of decoloniality schools in South Africa. And that is to come out soon in a publication from Australia. So I'm going to tell you a little bit, maybe for those of you who are not familiar at all with the work of the Black House, I will tell you a little bit in Sandy Radebe's own words, right? This is from the article that we wrote together. The Black House is a space for Black, and you will see, I think, how it connects with the notion of combative decoloniality, how I was framing combative decoloniality before. So it is a way of also further explain and clarify what combative decoloniality means. The Black House is a space for Black and decolonial thinking and organizing, and is committed to the work of reviving and promoting Black radical and combative decolonial thinking with the purpose of self-liberation from white racist epistemologies and colonial pedagogy currently disseminated by South African schools, universities, and society at large. We think of our consciousness-raising and educational work in the community of Soweto as work based on Pan-Africanist Black consciousness decolonial thoughts. We concern ourselves with systemic and institutional racism, where it pervades private and public institutions in what we call occupied Asania. The Black House Project pays careful attention to the limitations of Blacks in anti-Black spaces, but goes further and tries to create fresh furrows from which organic ideological traits for Black thought lead to the end of the world as we know it. In problematizing the contradiction that comes with the structuring of Black thinking within white supremacist academia, Black House Collective provides a cathartic space for Black philosophers, thinkers, and activists alike that will shape their next generation. Black House thus aims to advance a Black liberation project and Black liberation thought beyond the confines of white academia and liberal universities, at least in the context of South Africa. Keeping true to the Black radical thought inspired by Blackwatch, the BHK invites Black philosophers, thinkers, and activists alike into a space that bridges the political and intellectual void by enabling Black discussion between Black bodies within the white academic space. It offers Black love founded on Black solidarity to those who are systematically precluded from this space and locked into Soweto, a zone of dehumanization. Now I will read you a short part of the section that I wrote that is in dialogue with her. And there is also talking about my experience here in South Africa. I first visited South Africa in January 2014 or 2013 was for the first decoloniality summer school here in Pretoria. Former President of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, gave the opening keynote address. There were more than 100 participants, most of them Black South Africans, avid to learn about decoloniality. I came as an instructor, but also as someone who wanted to learn. Very quickly, I found not only interlocutors, but potential collaborators. And at least from the second year on, I started to invite some of the students to be collectors. The collaborations led to the introductions of poems, storytelling and performance, and visits to a gallery guided by a curator, an artist. In this process, we were reinventing the classroom and breaking the models of traditional academic scholarship and pedagogy. The decoloniality that I wanted to teach and explore could not be reduced to the varsity topic, the theme of a lecture, or the object of scholarly investigation. Right. Then came 2016. I had a one-semester sabbatical coming up, and I had decided that I wanted to spend it in South Africa. After concluding a period of campus leadership and organizing at my university in the US, I thought that it would be a perfect place to conclude a book manuscript, learn more about South African and African struggles, and seek to continue and start new collaborations. Little did I suspect when I made my plans in January 2015 that the South Africa to which I would return in early 2016 was going to be a very different one. The change was triggered by the performance by activist Kumani Makwele at the University of Cape Town in March 2015. You know about the performance that originated Rosemo's Fall. Right? I felt that I had lived a long time in South Africa during those 3 intense months of 2016. At the university, I felt like an ethnographer in an occupied space, occupied by overwhelming anti-Black and anti-Indigenous thinking and attitudes. The atmosphere at the university was heavy. Observing primarily white academics grapple with Rosemo's Fall and Fismo's Fall was like watching repeated performances of reason fleeing the room as soon as a Black body entered the scene. This is a metaphor taken from Fanon. The experience made it particularly clear and palpable that the academy was and remains an occupied space, that the university is an institution dedicated to the modern colonial occupation of knowledge. And so, as a movement in New York City, Decolonize This Place calls it, we need to deoccupy the university, and that's partly that kind of shaking, cracking, deoccupying the university is what I saw that it was being done in Soweto, right? With folks from the university, but from outside doing that combination. In the words of one of the elders from Soweto, we can consider the Black House and Funda Community College what they have been doing there as a vortex of decolonial possibilities. To cite the General Sibusiso Kumalo from Soweto. For me and those whom I came to meet in the struggle, the Black House was a place of togetherness and combativity that served as a solid ground for the preparation of decolonization and the occupation project. Now, I'm going to jump a little bit here, but I want to say that because the spirit of combining, transgressing, opening, crossing borders, and bringing different spaces and community in the same place has been critical in the work that we have been doing, is central for the Black House paradigm, but also it doesn't stop in challenging the divides between the university and the outside, between art and scholarship, right? Between active organizing and direct action. It's also a project that it opens up to contact and collaboration with similar projects in other places. So we have also been developing this relationship with other organizers, including organizers and artists from where I come from, Puerto Rico, which is a colony of the US, right? So we are actually concretely, remember how the Americas and Africa were so crucial to construct the building of the coloniality principle. So we want to explore the synergies between Africa and the Americas to explore the decoloniality principle and to advance decoloniality. And that is something that we have been doing now in the last 2 years. The Black House also has a winter school that is actually taking place this week. That is why my Puerto Rican colleagues are here, right? And so it is a site. It is a space where we try to do all of what we're saying, putting this in practice, creating like an engine, a vortex, where these ideas are shared, feelings expressed, right? Ideas, theories explored, and so on. I say that in that article that beyond the horizon of modern colonial studies, the Black House paradigm does not aim to create a new form of African studies, and our goal is not to correct or reform either Caribbean or US American studies. The proposal is that the decolonization of knowledge, including the decolonization of the university, requires a different approach and orientation. The BHK paradigm is one among other such insurgent projects that intervene in and that challenge the university while having their centers of gravitation in collectives that are engaged in combative decolonial struggles. Ours is simultaneously a struggle-based, interinstitutional, transatlantic, transnational, and transcontinental combative decolonial project with nodes in Africa via South Africa, the Caribbean, and the United States. We cross borders and connect struggles from the ground up, thereby also strengthening, making visible, and linking local and regional projects, initiatives, and movements for liberation and decolonization. And I would like to conclude by giving you a taste of the Black House paradigm and what we have been doing as reflected in the transnational and transcontinental combative decolonial projects that we have been pursuing. One of them involves participation from Afro-Caribbean members from the U.S. colony of Puerto Rico. The Decoloniality School, organized by the Black House, now in its third year, has greatly benefited by the presence of Maricruz Rivera Clemente, here with us, and Marcos Peñalosa Pica, here also with us. Dr. Rivera Clemente is the founder and director of an organization in Puerto Rico called Corporación Piñones Se Integra, or COPI. Piñones is the area in which Maricruz and Marcos live in Puerto Rico, which is also the best known Black Puerto Rican town in Puerto Rico. Marcos Peñalosa Pica is the musical director of the international Bomba organization called Majestad Negra, or Black Majesty. And Bomba is an Afro-Caribbean music and dancing genre. Instrumentally, Bomba is defined by the centrality of the drum. And Marcos brought one of his drums from Puerto Rico to Soweto last year, and again this year. The impact of Marcos' drumming in Soweto was such that the Black House decided to name this year's winter school as follows: Drumming Up Revolution, a centenary celebration and decolonial praxis in honor of Malcolm X, Lumumba, and Fanon. This year, and actually this is more important than you can imagine, because COPI, the organization founded and led by Dr. Rivera Clemente, and where Majestad Negra is housed, is part of. They already have a project of years that they call Building a Bridge from Piñones to Africa. So now we're going through the bridge, and the bridge got to Soweto, and then Soweto wanted them back. And then Soweto responded with framing the entire conference around the drumming. Right? This year, every day of the school, every single day, which is taking again this week, opens with a drumming ritual. And Marcos will be the one doing this ritual tomorrow, when the Black House Collective moves to the community of Tembelige. This is a community that has worked with the Institute of Social and Health Sciences for many years. So we're building those connections. See? Coming inside the university to different communities, you see the vortex, to continue this winter school. So we're going to Tembelige tomorrow, and we're going to focus tomorrow, we're going to honor tomorrow Fanon. We're dedicated like one day to each of these. Tomorrow is Fanon's turn, and tomorrow Fanon's daughter will join us in Tembelige. She came explicitly to participate in the Black House Collective School this week. Oh, she's here. You came here. Mireille, I thought, great to see you. I thought she was going directly, but so excellent that you came. So now, for those of you who cannot make it to Tembelige tomorrow, I thought that you might like to have a taste of Marcos's drumming here. A few notes before I pass the microphone to him. First, the drum is an ancestral instrument that has served for multiple purposes in Africa and the African diaspora, including communication, celebration, and preparation for combat. Second, including Bomba, this genre of music, in a talk on combative decoloniality cannot be more proper, since Bomba means, in Marcos' words, and I quote, lucha y resistencia, combat and resistance. That's the definition of Bomba. Third, remember what Fanon wrote about decolonization? That is that it infuses a new rhythm. Remember, I told you to remember that? Specific to a new generation of people with a new language and a new humanity. Well, drumming up the revolution is a call for letting the drum help us and guide us in our efforts to being, thinking, and acting in defiance of the coloniality principle. We are responding to the coloniality principle with decolonial drumming as part of a combative decolonial aesthetics that refuses to be separated from the spiritual, the intellectual, and the practical. The drum is also a connector between our struggles in Africa and the Caribbean. The drum marks the beat that helps us to communicate even as we speak in different languages. Yesterday, in one of the sessions at the Black House School, Marcos has told me after watching the presentation, Nelson, as we here in the schools, Caribbean and Soweto and so on, are talking the same language. And sometimes maybe they coming from Puerto Rico can communicate in that language, feel more at ease in that language that other people, even in Africa or South Africa, when they go to a place like that. Precisely if we have been trained in particular ways, right? Yesterday, I look to this, I took this to mean that Marcos saw the deep affinities between the Black House Project and what he and Maricruz do in Puerto Rico. The drum is a crucial part of this affinity, but by no means the only one. At the same time, drumming is setting up the beat that is allowing us to cross borders, respect, and learn from differences while avoiding simplistic dichotomies between Africa and the Americas. Follow the beat. We already saw that both areas played, Africa and the Americas, a major role in the formation of the coloniality principle. Our work at the Black House Collective, at COPI, and similar organizations indicates that the ties between Africa and the Americas could also provide crucial elements in our combat against the coloniality principle and in our respective formations and expressions of the coloniality. Let our essentialistic and divisive spirits fall by letting the drum speak. In his brief performance today, Marcos will introduce us to 3 bomba drumming rhythms. The first one is called corvée, and it is a call for combat. The second one is a 6 corrido, and it is a celebration, like the celebration of a victory in combat. And the third one is a cuembé. And I'm learning all of this from Marcos. He is the teacher of all of this. He's the performer and the teacher. He has the wisdom and also the talent to play the drum. And it is a form of sending coded messages, such as planning the next revolt, because we know that the war didn't end with the last victory. This means that the combat is not over, and we are plotting a next revolt, and we need to communicate, but not overly expressively, right? We want to keep coded communication. The struggle continues, and it's crucial to share the plans for the combat and resistance among our maroon communities and communities in struggle. So without further ado, please help me welcome Marcos Peñalosa Pica to come here and take us through this 8 to 10 minutes ride, okay? Amandra. Sí, yo creo que sí. Again, remember, the first one is combat, the second one is celebration, the third one is the coded messaging. And then let me see, do we have an additional microphone? Maybe we need also, can we move this one perhaps? Is there a way to use, maybe, to amplify the sound of the, Yeah, por eso lo vamos a hacer en la tercera. Okay. No sé, mejor lo dejamos para no, there is no microphone. Oh, maybe it's coming. Is it coming? Thanks a lot. Sorry, I did not tell you before. Good to see you. Okay, let's see. The first one is the sound of combat. And the performance would include other musicians, dancers, right? And he said a lot is in the dialogue between the dancers and the musicians. So you're getting just a tiny bit of it, and it involves the community too. Yeah, it will be a dancing, showing that the getting ready for combat. Yeah, and the dancers doing their thing there, calling even for more agitation from the drum. Okay, the second one is the Seis Corrido, and it's about the celebration. And the third one is going to include something. It's going to. Is it working? No. It's going to include. Oh, it left. Hello. Oh, it's there. The third one. I think the sound is gone. That's the power. Is it load shedding? Load shedding in the time. Hey, that sounds like Puerto Rico. You see, at home. La luz se fue, entonces por eso el micrófono no está funcionando. Should we wait for it to go, or should we continue? Continue. Okay, so we're doing without the, but we will need your help though. Okay. This one is interactive, right? And tú estabas explicando, les explico lo que es los coded messages en Kinje. Okay, so that you know, in this one, he's also going to be singing. He's also a magnificent singer. Yeah. So he's going to be singing a number of verses which are sharing the messages with the other communities about preparing for the next battle, right? But in between, you are going to be saying Kinje, Kinje, Kinje. So we will give you, whenever we point to you, Kinje, and then you will get the rhythm, okay? Kinje, and Kinje is a name. It was a name, and it is a name of person who came, kidnapped from Africa, enslaved, brought to the ports, and that person received that name. And in a way, the role in the song is in a way of saying that I hear the message and I am here, Kinje. I hear the message and I'm here, Kinje. That's what Kinje means. I'm ready to move. I'm receiving the message, I'm ready to move to the combat. Okay? So you lead us with the singing, and then then we're going to say the Kinje.
Kinje, 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 bambule, Kinje, Kinje, bambule, Kinje, ay dale rule, Kinje, en Senegal,
Kinje,
ay dale
Kinje,
en Pretoria,
Kinje,
ay Soweto,
Kinje,
ay baila Kinje,
Kinje,
ay dale Kinje,
Kinje,
en el Congo,
Kinje,
ay dale Kinje,
Kinje,
ay dale Kinje,
Kinje,
ay dale Kinje, ay dale Kinje,
Kinje,
ay dale Kinje,
Kinje,
dale Kinje,
Kinje,
ay dale Kinje,
Kinje,
ay baila Kinje,
Kinje,
ay baila Kinje,
Kinje,
dale Kinje,
Kinje,
ay legal,
Kinje,
el coco Kinje,
Kinje,
ay dale rule,
Kinje,
y vuelto otra vez
Kinje. Yeah, demanding a dancer. Yeah. This goes with dancing. To complete it, please. Yes. Dale, play it. Come on. Thank you. By the way, this is the flag of Loíza, where they come from. And this was, South African Puerto Rican combination, playing the maracas here and the drum. Thank you. So yes.
We take how many questions?
Sure.
Three.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Nelson Maldonado Torres, for that, thought-provoking and inspiring talk. Before we take on the questions, I would like to extend a warm welcome to Mireille Fanon Mendes. Mireille, okay. You want to clap? Yep. Mireille Fanon Mendes was our guest at the 2018 DECOLONIAL Summer School, where she gave the keynote. Thank you so much for being with us here today. I'm going to take questions 3 at a time. Be short and to the point so that we can give others a chance to ask Professor Maldonado Torres questions, or even if his comment, just make sure that they are short. Thank you. 3 at a time. I've noted.
Thank you, Professor. I'll be brief. So, my question in the dynamic of combativity, how do we combat without destroying everything? And a follow-up question to that is, the idea of decoloniality light, could it be an attempt to not throw the baby along with the bathwater? Thank you.
Thank you for that. Noted. The second one, third hand. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Professor Torres. I've come to appreciate the emphasis that you've placed on combat in doing as a way of dealing with the nature of coloniality. And as you were speaking, my mind caught something else that might be in relation to what you're speaking about, and that is the contemporary effect of drone warfare. Okay, so as you were speaking about combat, my mind got attention of something else, which is a feature of our contemporary world, and that is combat, drone warfare, combat. And drone warfare is interesting because it emphasizes, it speaks about the enemy that is receding from the trenches that we could easily identify and deal with. And so I was wondering whether you could, what would be the nature, how should we think about combat in a context where the enemy or enmity is receding and therefore concealing itself from the possibility of the arsenal that could deal with it? Thank you.
Thank you. Prof. Sabangani, third question.
Thank you very much. Indeed, we are here and raring to be part of this vortex that is being orchestrated wherever we find ourselves. And indeed, from where I sit, it is not a falsity to say that my greatest lessons, the lessons of my life, have been outside the parameters of academia, and that I learned to my great gratitude. I want to posit a thought that perhaps is swelling in the lower levels, to say that the violence that is perennial to whiteness is in fact a sign, is in fact informed by a deep existential fear. So beyond the question of a superiority that is contrived and that is so deeply asserted over epochs lies this existential fear that is being even spoken about with Gaza. My second point is to say, can we read the corporate university in terms of whiteness, one way or the other? Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. You can respond, Prof. Nelson.
Yeah, thanks for the questions. With regard to the first one, whether how to engage in combat without destroying everything, that's sometimes I think that the modern colonial world has made us think that everything that it produces is so indispensable that if we don't have it, we cannot live with it. And the moment we put something to refrain, we are afraid that suddenly, what are we going to do? Are we going to eliminate everything? Everything that sustains us? But if you see, I mean, if you look at the colonization struggles, if you look, Fanon's writings show you in the process of the colonization of Algeria, what does it mean to decolonize Algeria, right? And what does it mean to kick the French out? What does it mean to refuse to think according to the dictates of the coloniality principle, according to the dictates of the genomic principle, right, of the Cartesian cogito? We can challenge all of that, but that doesn't mean that, for example, we cannot use a technology of the radio, right, of the radio that came to us through the French, use it to communicate for our own purposes with our own logic to help us in our struggle against the French. That is, there are multiple tools, multiple technologies that have been, that we associate with the West or with modernity, that some of them it has stolen from other places and then sold it to us through globalized Western modernity. And so in the battle, the collectives determine which tools can be mobilized and be effectively used in the struggle right now. We will lose if we say, no, we're not going to use any tools if it has any mark of the West in it. That will be self-defeating, and it has, that's not the reality. It's the way that you use the tools. Now, in the process, you can discard some of them completely and eliminate them. And also, let's not forget the tools that we bring from before coloniality emerged, or the ones that we invented because we were imprisoned and killed by coloniality, that we invented, right? People were forced to invent new things. And so the combat is a call to relate in this generative way with what we see around us and to be creative. Instead of thinking that our only possibility is somehow to reproduce the modern, more colonial world, or to fear that if we challenge the logic, we're going to be outside, without dispossessed, without a home. No. Now, with regards to decoloniality, the problem, Fanon explored this phenomenon in Breacher of the Earth. He spent quite a number of pages talking about how intellectuals, in the context of the struggle for decolonization, how they sometimes respond to or relate or fail to relate to the struggle, right? So he talks about different phases of writing, right? And first you find an intellectual that seeks to assimilate into the West by learning about Western culture more than even Europeans know about Western culture, right? And then they said that once that project is shaken, and it's typically shaken not necessarily by intellectuals, it's by people from the ground who are pushing against that discourse and that logic, that then some of them get the clue and they say, no, I need to be more critical of that. But criticism of coloniality is not the same as decoloniality. Right? Criticism of Eurocentrism is a bare minimum of what you can do. Right? Some people conflate the two. If you're a critic of Eurocentrism, you're immediately decolonial. And Fanon said, we need to be careful, especially, he says, with experts and intellectuals and the like, because it's not difficult for them to somehow code you're talking about codes, right? Integrate elements of that discourse of decolonization, of change. But he writes that typically they end up in a path of no exit. Because they're talking about that it's important to study, all civilizations in the Americas or in Africa and so on, as if that is going to win the struggle. And I'm saying that can be important, but that by itself is not the struggle. That is part of the struggle. And he says that beyond that phase of intellectual activity, or an intellectual who is just criticizing the colonial world because it produces death everywhere. He said, yes, you can do that, denounce it, and still be, in a space where you're not seeing the generative elements of collective activity against coloniality. And so he talks about a third phase that some could reach, which he calls the combative phase. And it is when you're breaking. It's not only simply learning about it's doing something with the contemporaries, with the descendants of those ancestors, to valorize the work of our ancestors, valorize all these cultures, but in the present context, when we know that there has been a major catastrophe that has affected all the worlds, and where we're forced to find ways to survive and to attempt to thrive. And we need to identify those spaces, right, and those practices. Think of, for example, of like when Angela Davis writes about the way in which patriarchy was confronted and kind of was confronted and annulled to some extent in the context of the slave household, because the experience of being enslaved for male and female in the field put them on the same and similar level. So when they came home, it was unthinkable for any of those two talking to the other one as if the one is the servant and the other no. Their gender has been kind of to some extent deprived at some level. And then when they get to the household, that free them to explore different relations. But how do you then build on that? It's by participating in communities, by elaborating that, right? By elaborating those ideas and identifying them. And how do you do that? By experts that come from the outside that study. No, that's a collective project. It's done as a collective. Right? So, and the danger of the coloniality light is that not only tends to stop before getting there, but then many times posits itself as the authority and actually delegitimizes those who do the combative path and delegitimizes the community struggles. And that's why I don't think it's a matter, okay, let's do the coloniality light, at least we're doing something. No, you're playing a dangerous game. And you're lying to yourself if you think that that's the expression. No. And that's where Fanon is so critical, because in that moment, he went through different contexts and began to observe the limits, the different no exit road. No, that's not it. No, that's not it. It has to be combative, struggle, organizing. And that's what, remember, he wrote these books. He passed through the university, but he did not stay in the university. He passed through the psychiatric hospital, was a director, but he did not stay there. Because he was putting together and pushing us to see about the colonial knowledge production as something that includes different elements from all of that. But the center of gravitation is at the heart of collectives, which are never perfect and always limited, but always trying to process. And that's the difference between the combative approach and the light approach, or non-combative, proto-combative, non-combative, and sometimes anti-combative approach. With regard to the enemy receding, I think that if anything in this day, this time and age, what we're seeing is the enemy doing the opposite, like the rise of fascism across the world. Right, in the U.S., where I come from, is just impressive. In other parts of Europe, many other parts here, you have the AfriForums of the world. Remember that for the president of the U.S., there is genocide being committed in South Africa against white people, and white people are given refuge, and only white people from South Africa given refuge in the United States, while people who are undergoing, being exposed to brutal wars and being dispossessed and pushed, they cannot even apply for refugee status right now. So that's the kind of, so if anything, what we've seen in the last maybe 15 years or so is an increment of a counter-revolutionary response all throughout. But when there seems to be a receding kind of people coming, leaving the flanks of the battle, typically, Fanon writes, typically it's about reconfiguring their hegemony. Right? There are different ways of reconfiguring their hegemony. And sometimes it looks like they are receding, and what they want is for some of you who are combating, enter there, get seduced with the logic, and become part of them at the end. Right? And that's why we must be very, very careful when engaging in these struggles. Right? And that's why I think that Fanon's works are so important, because he lived a short life. He died at 36 years old, but he was put in such a situation that he had to learn or to die quickly. And he, luckily for us, he wrote and left us a testament to the terrain of battle under the catastrophe of modernity coloniality. The existential fears even increase right now because of this situation. I think increase because now this re-emergence of fascism everywhere. And now the interesting thing with the academy is that then for the new fascism emerging, the academy that we consider to be, I've written about it in other places as the site of a white academic field. So I think it can still be connected with whiteness, the corporate university. But remember that even that liberal white academic field is conceived by the new fascists as too woke. Was taking too unfair to everyone. It's not really representing equality. So now we're seeing a repression of even that, what seemed to be concessions before. Concessions, like liberal concessions to, integrating the university, no longer have informal apartheid and so on. But those seems to be the concessions, but it's really a reconfiguration of that liberal, power. Because instead of addressing the challenge for decolonization, they talked about the liberals, diversity and inclusion. Right? Everything is integrated so that the coloniality principle is remain intact, even as other things begin to change. But that things that begin to change have been too much for those that faithfully adhere to the coloniality principle in its most brutal, radical expression. And that's why we're seeing the rise of the right right now, right? Going against the liberal, but that's an intra-European, intra-modern Western debate, right? And so we have to see how we engage in that combat. And I think what is crucial is in those moments, the actions, the plotting among each other, with each other, taking seriously different zones of combat and different co-combatants, right? We cannot afford, that's why we cannot afford to have decoloniality light. We already have the liberals doing that, in a way. So we have to respect what we do. We have to take each other seriously. We have to go beyond simplistic dualisms and binaries and so on, get the work done, decolonize our expertise, and create more vortexes for combative activity, right? And then we'll be better prepared to withstand the pressure of both the liberals and the neo-fascists.
I'll take the second round of questions. I've Zandi Khadebe, Dr. Molete, and Dr. Mkonza.
Thanks, Katlego. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Prof. My question is directed to Comrade Marcos. I hope someone can translate. Thank you. It comes from, obviously, the work that you've inspired in the Black House Collective. We've been thinking through the work of healing through the drum. Should I say the whole question and the translation will follow? Okay. We've been thinking through the question of healing in the drum for communities, particularly in the household, where you found that, the average household has more Bibles than drums. And the idea of healing is always, diverted away from the drum. And I just want to understand if this is a similar experience in Puerto Rico, where you come from, in the community, and if your work also, tries to think or tries to position the drum as a legitimate space for, thinking about healing the colonial wound and healing for the colonial subjects, as it were. Thank you.
The second one is Dr. Mulite over there, and then Dr. Mkonza. Please, Prof,
Katlego,
translate.
where are you? Why are you not taking the mic?
Translate for our sister. Okay.
Sobre todo en las casas, porque aquí está el fenómeno, porque escuchamos ya, de que hay casas que tienen más biblia que tambores. Yo te hace preguntas si eso tú lo has encontrado en Unisa, Puerto Rico, y cómo tú ves el rol, si tú ves un rol del tambor, y el tocar el tambor en la curación, en la sanación de tus cosas. Pero piénsala ahí y después volvemos, ¿ok? Con la respuesta. Okay.
Okay, thank you. I'll take the second question from Dr. Mulite and then Dr. Mkonza.
Okay, thank you, Winnie, and thank you, Prof, for this wonderful presentation. In your presentation, you made a reference to two different periods in the history of colonization. One is colonization by the Spanish in 1492 of the Americas, and then one is 1444 by the Portuguese colonizing Senegal. But I might have missed your explanation of the connection. I just need a clarity on that, because in my understanding, in terms of the modernity coloniality, the starting point is 1492, in which case we can talk about the linking of modernity and coloniality as a foundational point. Can we also say the same about 1444, that, or can we trace also the modernity coloniality project in 1444, given the understanding that that modernity, the intertwining between modernity and coloniality, started in 1492 during the colonization by the Americas. I mean, by the Spanish colonization by the Americas. The last question is, in layman's term, what could you say is a combative decoloniality? Maybe I struggle to understand that. Thank you.
Dr. Mkonza?
I'm not going to stand up. Yes, afternoon, colleagues. Thank you, sir, Prof. Nelson, for this beautiful lecture that you've given us. We know that Prof. Torres is an old friend of the college, and I just want to start by expressing my gratitude for always including the arts, either in theorizing or linguistics, the drumming, the gallery. You've always made the arts become part of what you're articulating. And in our African culture, that is very important. And also within the college, there is a Department of Arts and Music. So thank you so much for that. Just coming back to the combative decoloniality, no one knows better the whole separation between being inside and being outside than South Africans. The colonized black subjects being the monster that is looking through the window that exists outside of humanity, of being. So, I mean, before 1994, even these universities, I love how you capture it when you say universities are a satellite, not the center. But the systems seemed to trick us. We were tricked to look at the university as the center because of the restraint and we were not allowed to participate in these institutions. They were not made or created with the black colonized subjects in mind. We were just a subject of study. So soon as after 1994, we were eager to go full in and participate. And we were tricked, dumped to become almost like a center. So again, I just want to say thank you. From 2013, you came here, started in a university as a center, but then you started, linking us to the communities that we overlooked, literally, like the Black House Collective and other collectives, and also the collaboration that you are working with in Puerto Rico. So that for us is teaching us in terms of theory and practice, the center and the outside. Just to close up, I was so interested, while you were talking about combative decoloniality, I couldn't help to think about Che Guevara, how he was also, it was almost like you are comparing Fanon to Che Guevara as well. Look, they were both doctors, of course, but one is a psychologist, one is a medical doctor, but how they dedicated themselves and served beyond the disciplines of the university qualifications. So Silver Winter, New Science, you are offering combative decoloniality. I don't see them as totally different, because as much as she's offering new science, but I think it's also linked to resignation and to delinking from the system. Thank you.
Prof. Nelson, I'm going to request that you respond, and we'll give our colleagues to respond to that one question from Zandi. You start, yes.
Ya quiere que empiece. Yes, the second question about Africa and the Americas and 1440 and 1492. Well, first off, 1492, things do not happen in a particular day in a particular year, just like that, right? Particularly in dialogue with Winter, I published an essay, I don't know, almost some time ago, maybe a decade ago or more, where I try to trace to understand what happens in the context of the so-called discovery. You have to go back to the 12th, 13th century to understand the modifications that begin to happen in the Christian world, right? But for Winter, but then a pivotal moment is that those Christians, particularly in the Iberian Peninsula, you found a particular very dogmatic and violent forms of Christianity that had evolved in this fight with Islam, right, in the south. And remember that 1492 was the year, yes, of the so-called discovery, but also the official expulsion of Jews and Muslims from the Iberian Peninsula. They were working at it, that exclusivist conception, proto-racist conception for some time. But for Winter, what got globalized had to do with Europeans leaving the terrain of Europe and encountering people where they thought were not people before, right? Beginning to so-called discover new places. And for her, before 1492, that started in the expeditions of Portuguese navigators in West Africa, right? So she says 1492 is not a point. She says from 1440 to 1492, that's the unit, right? She wants to insist that's the unit. She doesn't want to say 1492 without 1440, right? She has been very consistent with that. Some people neglect that. If you ask them, they will accept, right? Even Columbus participated with Portuguese explorers in those expeditions to Africa. So the framework of mind had been trained by that. So when he comes to the Americas and begins to call people Indians and to depict them in particular ways, that was not original. He was extending in a new setting. But it's a new setting that was breaking from the inside, breaking apart the European world as it was known, opening up a new conception of the world. And you cannot explain it without those expeditions. So for Winter, she would want to say and insist that we need to think not either 1440 or 1492 both together. Is when we look at the genesis of the coloniality principle, those two. But in a way, we have to go even before, right? So this is not a matter of finding when was the day what time decoloniality began and where, this is a number of processes that come together. And she says that between that time, 1440 to 1492, is that we got the, some of the pieces, most crucial pieces coming together and then spreading, right? So that's why for her, Africa is also central in the story. And it permits them to see the coloniality in relation to both Africa and the Americas, right? Then, with regard to combative decoloniality, I mentioned different forms of conceptions, but you can think about it as a form of decoloniality premise on the central importance of the formation of collectives of people, of colonized who come together to challenge the institutions that affect them in their communities and to form other forms of relationships that exceed the mandates of the coloniality principle. And they do that by the creation of activities that begin to generate new movements, new ideas, new rhythms. That's where the drum is so important. We're not talking just simply ideas of. We're talking people coming together, body to body, creating, thinking, challenging, plotting. That's the heart of combative decoloniality. And we, in different institutions, we can also occupy different institutions and use resources from those institutions and use our talents as we cultivate in those institutions. Use them not as academics who take the struggle as an object of analysis, but engage as co-combatants who happen to be in academy. It's a different logic. Okay? And that's where the resignation takes place, because you're not thinking that your thought process is being driven by recognition of merit according to how the university or how you're supposed to do it, but you're doing it, the resignation is more clear that you are taking these vortexes of combat as the centerpiece. I don't see that clear in the Science of the Word project. I think, of course, Winter, and she has an essay, she would validate, she considers very important the work of agents and collectives and the work that happens in the ground. But conceptually, you see, when she begins with Fanon's sociogenic principle, but then she takes it, and interestingly enough, then she takes it, let me begin. She actually starts with Césaire on Discourse on Colonialism, which appears at the beginning of Black Skin, White Mask, when Césaire is calling attention to how the colonized absorb the feeling of inferiority and all of that, right? So she's there with both Fanon and Césaire, but Césaire is the one who formulates that. Fanon takes that project, deepens it, right? And then formulates the sociogenic principle, the sociogeny, from which she derives the sociogenic principle. And from there, she takes us back to Césaire's project of the Science of the Word in an essay on poetry and knowledge. What I'm saying is that this is a different route if from there, from sociogeny, you go, instead of going back to Césaire, you go to the Fanon of Toward the African Revolution, to the Fanon of Bedouin colonialism, to the Fanon of Wretched of the Earth, where he himself offers what is supposed to come after the recognition of sociogeny, which is the involvement and the value of collective combat, where all forms of thinking, but not only thinking and decoding, right, language and how the coloniality principle is formed and other principle is formed, but no, the coloniality will involve the community discussions, will involve engagement with drumming, will involve other sorts of activities that I think need to be put more to the foreground, and that's crucial, because I don't think it's too difficult ultimately that to conceive the science of the word as still to a great part an intellectualistic project, right? Where you need people knowledgeable of the different languages and knowing the history of the linguistic systems and decoding, and you need the new scientist as a decoder. And what I'm saying is, for that decoder that we need, but we probably have decoder in multiple ways, in multiple languages, in different varieties. And maybe more important than a particular expertise is the very dynamics by which we come together to share our knowledges and plot our combat. And that is taking place in another ground, right? And so that's what I'm kind of pushing, that other project that is based on Fanon, but not only on Fanon Black Skin, White Masks. on FANON, the FANON that is a veteran of the Second World War, who fought with the French against the Nazis. The FANON, who was young, right? He was young when he escaped, and he left to join the resistance against the Nazis, and then he joins the Algerians against the French, right? So we're talking, for him, it was very clear there is something very valuable in a certain kind of activity, and how the colonial knowledge is generated cannot be divorced from being there available as one among others in a collective. And a number of Fanon's writings actually are not only his. He put his name, but he's sharing collective wisdom from the collective, from the Liberation Front, right? We take it in the Academy as the author because we're based on the notion of authorship and individual authorship and recognition. But he's operating with another logic, the collective. He just put the name, but many of the ideas were formulated in collective, in together, and they were part of internal debates of the movement, and they decided what they wanted to put out, right? And that's the combative strategy, right? So again, it's not totally positive. I'm not saying that science, a project like that is not important, but what I'm saying is more satellite than center, just like the university is more satellite than center. And then, yeah, I think that was it. Marcos. Yeah.
No, yo hablo aquí.
Okay.
Saludos.
Greetings.
Sí, respondiendo a la pregunta, es cierto, el tambor para nosotros hace presencia en todos los hogares de manera...
Ven, dilo, yo lo cojo para que te escuchen tú.
Ok, saludos. Es cierto lo que ella habla del tambor en nuestras comunidades negras en Puerto Rico. Hace presencia en cada uno de nuestros hogares, ya sea física o espiritualmente, porque es el arma el más fuerte que tenemos nosotros para combatir la imposición del catolicismo y el colonialismo en nuestra tierra.
He says that in Loíza, where he comes from, the drum is seen as that tool of healing. And that the drum either is always in the houses in Loíza, either physically or in some other forms, perhaps musically, because it's the one form that allows the people to combat the coloniality of Catholicism in their communities.
Nosotros aprendemos las danzas y el baile de ustedes, de África. África es la madre. Las imposiciones que hemos tenido de España y de Estados Unidos han tratado de desarticular nuestra identidad propia. Nosotros pues mantenemos esa conexión, ese puente cultural con África, heredado de nuestros abuelos. El tambor tiene un solo idioma, un solo lenguaje, a la diferencia de que en una comunidad puedan hablar inglés, español, entre otras lenguas. Nosotros nos comunicamos con el tambor con una fuerza espiritual para combatir lo que es el colonialismo. Nuestras canciones, el ritmo, nuestros bailes expresan al sistema de que nosotros tenemos una propia identidad, de que luchamos por nuestros espacios de gente negra. ¿Puedo seguir?
Déjame decir, we actively cultivated in our community dance and music that comes from Africa. For us, that's very clear, because we inherited that connection to Africa from our ancestors and our grandparents and our parents, and we connect with Africa also to counter the imposition of a Spanish culture and the culture from the U.S. that comes to our communities, and for us the drum, and that's that is also so central in Africa, is also represents the one language that we have in common, even if our communities speak different languages. The drum is a spiritual force to combat colonialism, and our dances and songs express the combat of black people to be able to live together and to fight for their spaces in their communities, for the well-being of the landscape and nature. And actually, I should say, Loíza is a place, it's a small island that used to be refuge for Maroons, Maroon communities, where they built themselves alive against the plantation owners and the colonizers. So it has a long history of black resistance and connection with Africa, and that's what they try to cultivate and to amplify those struggles.
Es interesante, en mi pueblo hay muchas iglesias de diferentes sectas, denominaciones, pero más interesante es que esas personas no se apartan del tambor. Tienen sus Biblias en sus casas, pero tienen el tambor en su corazón, ¿verdad? No se apartan de esas tradiciones porque es la lucha y la resistencia de nuestro pueblo para no perder nuestra propia identidad. Yo hablo inglés, pero una forma de resistencia es no hablarlo, porque tengo mi propia lengua.
In Loíza, there are many Christian churches, right? But what he would say is that even when people have Bibles in their homes, they do not leave the drum. That the drum remains, even maybe not physically, but drumming, and the drum remains, because for everyone it's clear that it is the tool, the technology to fight and resist, and to be able to serve the particular identity as African descendant people and black people in Loíza, whether they are Christian or not. He says also that, as I was saying before, drumming is connected with, is a form of a language that allows for communication across different communities, and that he, as a drummer, he's betting on the power of the drum to communicate. He speaks English, but he refuses to use it, in partly because we are a colony of the US. But he lets the drum do the speaking for him. Thank you.
I'm going to take the last round of questions. I've noted you, my brother, but first I would want to check if there any hands, from colleagues that are on teams. Okay, thank you. My brother, Motlatsi, 3.
Thank you very much, Prof. I am called Ambe. I am from the Department of Communication Science, where I'm a PhD student. I am researching using decolonial theory to study what is commonly called the natural resource curse. But my question stems from the question that was asked by one of our doctors regarding the idea of drone warfare and the fact that he believed that coloniality, the enemy is receding. So my question is this: since coloniality gained access, spread across the world by gaining access to the minds of the colonized people and implanting a particular form of thinking, and now that we are discussing about this combative decoloniality, is it also possible? It's true that from the global south, we cannot reverse colonization by going to colonize the global north and also teaching them to accept our own way of thinking. But is it possible for us to find other tools, tools of subtle power that will also present maybe as beneficial to the global north, but that will also be carrying a decolonial message across, so that we also fight coloniality from the center? Thank you. Over.
Thank you. Give it to my brother there, and then we'll take it to the last one, being Motlatsi.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Should I stop or?
No, you can continue.
Thank you very much, Prof. It's a great honor and a privilege to come to engage such a distinguished academic. So my first question, it will be from the national consciousness pitfalls, which FANON spoke about. about the anti-colonial, what to call, struggle. Remember, you'd recall that the anti-colonial struggle, it was pushed or it was hijacked by the nationalist project, which we see in most of the African countries and in most of the Latin American countries. It took over from that anti-colonial struggle. Therefore, I want to ask, that national project, is it part also of coloniality? That's what I want to ask. And another question that I want to ask is that, what is the difference between decoloniality and the revolution? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mutlatsi.
Thank you. So great to hear from you again, Prof. It feels like it's been a long time. The thing that I've really been thinking about and pondering as you've been speaking is, I love that the fact that you started with Descartes and the separation between the mind and body. Because what a lot of people don't talk about is that separation, in us absorbing that way of thinking, there's also a separation between the physical and the metaphysical. An acknowledgement of that element of our being. And so when I hear questions like there's no drum in our churches, I also wonder, but I went to my grandmother's church and I saw a woman pull a pillow, a small pillow from her bag and beat that pillow. Where we go, even at marches, there may not be a drum, but there will still be the beat, and you hear that beat. I think, I remember Lewis Gordon started one of those discussions, and he started with the beat, and when he started with the beat, he talked about the heart. And it's no coincidence that a lot of the beats that we use are close to the same resonance of our heartbeat. And so if we can recognize that, and we can agree on that, then it makes me start asking, okay, our colleagues here from Puerto Rico, how do you express this metaphysical, the spiritual, especially in light of being made invisible? How is that visibility made, and how do you understand that making of oneself visible within a metaphysical, or should I say, on a spiritual level? Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. I'll take the last question from Munyarazi Mushonga, who's at the University of Free State. Who should unmute? Okay. Mushonga, please unmute. We want to hear you. Munya. Still muted. We can't hear you. Okay, Munya, there's no sound. Please try to resolve that. Prof. Nelson Maldonado Torres, can you please respond to all the questions? And after Munya, I'm going to close the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know, I may not be completely understanding the notion that the enemy is receding. Maybe we can have a separate discussion about that aspect on how to interpret it. Again, particularly when I don't think the enemy has, this enemy and the coloniality principle has ever really receded, properly speaking. There have been different moments of intensity in the fight, but if anyone, this is one particularly strong one. But let me answer the part about, the point that we cannot revert colonization, and the idea that how to, we cannot colonize the colonizers to make them change their minds, but then how to still impact and be critical of the project from their inside, right? First off, decolonization, I mean, you can read The Wretched of the Earth. Fanon very elegantly and powerfully explains that, it begins with the confrontation with the colonial institutions wherever you are, right? And it's trying to create another kind of context, a context driven by a different principles than the coloniality principle, I would say. You're trying to build different forms of relations, different forms of affect, so that we can relate to each other, not simply as through the stereotypes that we have learned to see each other, but as full people to full people. You can touch each other, discover each other, listen to each other, be receptive toward each other. And we need to work hard to create that dynamic in our midst. That is what we want to do, right? And we want to work with others in other communities and make alliances. So, for example, in the case of Fanon was in Algeria, engaged in the Algerian Liberation Front, trying to do that in Algeria. But Fanon was clear, for the Algerian Revolution to triumph, Congo also had to triumph. Other parts of Africa did it, and Fanon was fervent Pan-Africanist in that sense, saying that one country in South Africa is not going to be able to really sustain itself and create this other dynamic. The question was never to go to Europe, take over Europe and change it. We can barely overcome the coloniality principle where we are. Barely, right? And in a way, that's not the way we want to, right? We are engaging them. César's discourse on colonialism engages Europe to basically challenge them that they should choose a politics of nationalities instead of continuing with the idea that when they were colonizing, they were civilizing people, right? That is their challenge. He was writing there. And actually, remember César, this is how we also impact that center. It doesn't have anything to do by creating a war and taking over, and no. Look at César, as a student, he came from Martinique, studying in Paris, right? And then in Paris, he finding other young students from Africa, from the Caribbean, and together forming a journal, L'Étudiant Noir. And from there, coming up with a new project that they call Negritude. And begin to create poetry, begin to create different works that are imitating in Paris. Right? And now, migration has increased in the global north. That's why you have Trump saying, no, you will have to go. They are afraid. There are enough people there that if people say, we are not going to seek assimilation, we are going to live dignified lives with others in this country, they can change those countries from within. So before they get that kind of consciousness, you are driven out. And if you stay, you're supposed to follow suit. Do not criticize Israel. Do not criticize the U.S. government. That you should know. We're going to persecute you. You're going to lose your job. You're going to do, right? There is a harsh forms of disciplining precisely so that the people who are already inside do not move in the colonial direction. But there is a lot of promise there in the multiplicity of peoples who are already migrants, people who are there or who were brought forcefully there, and they represent other horizons. That's what, the colonial education and the media is doing its work, limiting the scope and mindset of those populations, so that they think that the only way to legitimize their existence there is to be recognized by the white establishment. Yeah. But the struggle is happening. That's what is important also. Yes, we need to, Pan-Africanism is important, but also alliances between combatants here and combatants everywhere in the centers of power. And connecting, validating, amplifying your struggles in spite of these neo-fascist counter-revolutions, right? So it points to what we're doing here. What we can do here that's simply beyond talking and understanding something and publishing a paper has to do to actualize, to energize, to dynamize this struggle, which is global. So we don't have time to lose. We cannot think short-sightedly. We cannot think also, let's say, in a small-minded way, let's say, right? We don't have time for that. We have lost so much, and we have so much to connect and to weave and to heal, right? So how do we best do that with the tools that we have? That should be, I think, our challenge. and how we connect with those migrants, with other people in Africa, with all the, right? That there's a lot of weaving and connecting that needed to be done. I don't know if that could be called a revolution. Maybe. It depends. I remember Aníbal Quijano, who coined the term, coloniality. When we were meeting with him in the late 90s, early 2000s, he was very keen into thinking, well, we need to think about the idea of revolution. Yeah. But I think in a way, that was before the exploration of decolonial, right? Like the revolution is, there are different fires in different places. And then each generation, said Fanon, has to discover its mission, right? Whether to fulfill it or betray it in a relative opacity. But it is, you have to identify where these revolts are taking place, where the rebels are located, and how you connect with that, or not, right? That's for the generation to choose. Now, nationalism, yes, that's the national state apparatus is a modern colonial one, right? Everywhere. And so in some places, some leaders have come up trying to use that apparatus to limit its colonial power and try to give more power to peoples, right? The Venezuelan case is one, for example. And it's demonized like hell. But there have been a number of measures trying to do that. And it has many internal critics. Right? But it has tried, in a way, Venezuela has earned a blockade from the United States. Not for anything, right? It's because it's really challenging that way in which the state is supposed to work. It's still a state and there are many problems. And even a place like Venezuela still have to deal with the coloniality of the nation state. So I think decolonization implies inventing structures and political structures that exceed the parameters of the nation state. We have to go beyond the nation state, I think. Even with Africa, right? Even if we think, United Africa is the United Africa of different nation states, no, the horizon we have to reconceive. How do we relate to each other, the territories? And remember that the nation state was formed imposed boundaries to communities, right? Impose a number based on what? The Berlin Conference and the agreement to split Africa in multiple places, right? Who says that that's forever? But then again, we cannot change from one day to the next. How is that change if it is going to change? By the commitment of the collectives that come together, that work together, and the collaborations and the work organically itself could lead to some generative thinking about some other notion of the state. In the Americas, in the context of Guatemala, for example, where you have large sectors of indigenous peoples living in a nation state that has been colonial and continues to be colonial against them, they are intervening in the political arena, formulating what they call the plurinational state. Still calling a state, but they are changing the notion of the nation and trying to rethink the apparatus. So that is happening right now in different parts of the world. That's why we need to be in communication with each other and learn from each other, right? I remember also that when I mentioned Congo before, Fanon thought that Lumumba was the hope in a way for liberated South Africa because Congo was so crucial. And the moment that he was killed, it was a huge hit on the possibilities of decolonization, right? Because he had managed to get the vision of the kind of liberation that Fanon thought that he could, So it wasn't about the pitfalls, it was the possible successes. Someone like Lumumba, he saw it going in that direction. And what happened? He was killed. So if you really challenge coloniality, you get killed, fired, your country gets a blockade, right? That's why the notion of receding is difficult for me to understand. And yes, yesterday we had a fabulous lecture in the Black House we were in the African Freedom Station yesterday, and we have a beautiful lecture by a musician and creator and cultural creator who was telling all about the drum, the spirituality around the drum, and precisely insisting on the fact of the heart and the beat of the heart that is there, right? And you can see it about the drum amplifying the beat, and wherever there is a beat is a signal of life. And a beat by the drum is human life, right? So I would say that you were talking about, the question was about how to make ourselves visible But it was interesting because, and then you were talking the drum, right? How it could play a role making. But I think the power of the drum is that it can make us alert of each other, even without being seen, because we can hear the beat, right? We can hear the beat, and we can follow the beat, even when we do not necessarily see anyone. The beat still is present, even when the conditions of visibility have not been created yet. The drum can produce a beat that can hopefully lead us to positions that we can see each other, and we can touch each other, and feel each other, and discover each other, and start the combat. Yeah.
Is Mushonga still available?
Hi, we are going to read his question.
Okay, thank you.
He says, and I'm going to read it verbatim. I still want to push back at the takeoff date of coloniality as suggested by Dr. Mulete. That is to say, there is no 1492 without the 3 centuries of European crusades dedicated to driving the Muslims out of the Middle East and stopping the spread of the Islamic religion. The crusades are the foundational moment of coloniality, he says, and we need to reinsert 1095 before 1492. And he adds, any comment from Nelson?
Yes, thank you. As I was saying before, I think I went back tracking some of the significance to the 12th century. So not necessarily to the 11th century, but to the 12th century because of a number of debates. I think, a lot, what happens here is the following. A lot will depend on how you understand coloniality itself, right? And what happened before. Because we have had colonialism for a long time. We have had slavery before. We have had persecutions before, right? So that's not new. If we were going to look at that, right, we could be maybe tracked down. But something happened, I think, qualitatively, and I think that it involved the perception of the enemies of Christianity, not as Muslims, not as Jews, but as people who were really outside the parameters, the way in which Europeans understood that conception. For me, or what I have put forward, is that happens when Europeans begin to think about communities that even didn't have any religion. Because if you recognize, for them, for the Christians, the Jews and Muslims were fully humans, right? They're fully humans. The only thing is that they believe in the wrong religion. And they have taken our lands, and we need to be in fight with them or do that, and we need to be careful with them because they are. And the project for a long time for Christianity, yes, it involved wars and all of that, but the ultimate idea is that maybe we can develop arguments and persuade someone because they are rational, right? They are rational, we can persuade them. There was that notion. And the idea is that then they can possibly be converted, right? So there's a lot of violence in that process. And it includes, I think, the Crusades. But I think that the game begins to change when Christians begin to look around and say, is that people are not making lines to convert, right? And they are thinking, particularly with respect to some communities, that maybe they are outside the scope of being someone endowed with religion. Having a religion means that you are connected with God, that you have a soul that aspires to be connected with religion. For the Christian, the idea of Christianity is that Christianity is the one true religion. That of all the different religions, it is the religion that will connect you with God, right? But the other ones are false. But when you say about a community that they don't have a religion, you are in a way raising the possibility that they don't even have a soul. Therefore, that they belong to another area, domain of being altogether. And that's where I think that we find the seeds and precedents of coloniality. So I would not immediately, and I don't think, so I would put it somewhere there where that idea began to emerge, that there is another universe altogether different from the known world for Christians. That's why, coming back to Winter, the expeditions to Africa are so crucial, because they began to go to places that they had not traveled before and where they had not found people before. And that opened, the question is, how do we classify them? How do we classify them? And they began to think of all of them as Moors, but then it was not, right? But then something happened there that when Columbus gets to the Americas, the first thing that he says in his first trip is, indigenous people, they appear to be docile, they don't have clothes, and they appear to have no religion. There you have it. And there you have it at the moment of at the expansion, crucial expansion of Europe, right? When now Europe will take only a few years for them to know that they arrive to a new land and that they have a whole world to encounter these so-called indigenous peoples. And that's what changes the game. I think that even if we find, we can find precedents and so on, 1492 is still, because of the combination, it was everything coalesced and and then globalized strongly. That is why one of the writers, one of the priests who wrote chronicles of the conquest, when he described the conquest in the so-called discovery, to the king in the Christian kingdom in the Iberian Peninsula, that was before the formation of Spain as a state, right? He says, "Dear king, the discovery of the Americas is the greatest event in the history of humankind after the birth and resurrection of our Lord." That is what appears to them. And there is a reason for that. So I think if we can find many precedents and anchor points, there was still something there that happened that cannot be lost from view. Thank you.
Can you give the last warm round of applause to Professor Maldonado Torres, please? Thank you so much, colleagues. We are now left with one item on our agenda. Before I call Nomagugu Ngwenya to do the closing remarks and vote of thanks, I would just like to request one thing from you, that we allow this table, that is Professor Nkosi and her guests, to teach up, before we do that. And then also we allow Professor Maldonado Torres to get some food, and then we engage with him after that. From myself, it's a thank you. Thank you so much for being such a wonderful audience and for staying up to now. And this shows how important this discussion is to you. Thank you, and bye, colleagues.
Greetings, colleagues and distinguished guests. I'm Nomagugu Ngwenya, and I'm honored to be delivering the closing and vote of thanks for today's seminar. Thank you for all your thought-provoking reflections and engagements this morning. Prof. Nelson Maldonado Torres has offered us some stimulating elaboration on FANON's combative vision and praxis, and a critical, analytic, and ethical orientation for us to draw from and ensure the centrality of community and collectives. Furthermore, he has reminded us about the ongoing relevance of FANON's work in the context of the contemporary poly crisis. Prof. Maldonado Torres' insights on decoloniality principles are certainly valuable for most of us in our thinking going forward, especially as we similarly work with and in communities. Without taking much more time, on behalf of the College of Human Sciences and the Institute for Social and Health Sciences, we give our thanks to Prof. Maldonado Torres for your address and your generous collaboration with Unisa. Thank you to our Executive Dean, Prof. Nkosi, for your ongoing support that enabled this seminar to be possible, as well as for your support for all our engagements with our academic associates. We truly value and appreciate it. We also thank Mr. Marcos Penalosa Pica for his ever-powerful rendition of revolutionary drumming in this space. And sincere thanks to Kilebamang Winnie Mohupi and the ISHS support staff for all your efforts in ensuring the logistics for today are well taken care of. And last but certainly not least, to the audience for making time in your schedules to participate in today's seminar on the combative philosophy of Franz Fanon. While I'm up here, I'll ask that Prof. Nelson and Senor Marcos please come forward so we can share a token of our appreciation with you.
Thank you.
Wait, photos, evidence. Evidence, that's, you came to South Africa,
Yes.
then come closer. Okay, let's have Unisa.
Yes,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then, thank you very much. You can come closer. And then Unisa must show. no?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Senior Marcos.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Like you said, colleague, but you started talking